Loud. Okay, so file to download is product.list.xlsm. Okay, so today we are talking about error handling and debugging. And as I mentioned last time we were together, this is the last topic before the midterm, the last topic that will be covered on the midterm, which begins tomorrow. Any of you planning on taking it tomorrow? Opens at like 8 a.m. or something. Oh yeah, let me at it. Let me at this test. Remember, the last day, next Monday, the testing center closes early, and there's a fee, like a $5 fee to take it on Monday. All right, so we've got this file open, and this file is just some product data. So it was like some kind of outdoor store. So here's a description. Let's just look at one of these. Here's a prescription. The white-fronted goose call is the first custom call of its kind. It's called the Custom Brass Banded Spec Clear. In the hunting department, manufacturer is here and so forth. So as we kind of look through the issues around debugging and error handling today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to say, listen, I want to be able to select a column here, and I would like to build a new sheet, or maybe I just want to make a sheet of lists, and I just want to get a list of all the product ID, probably not the product ID, all the categories. So by list, what do I mean? Not all the data, just all the unique data. So I'd like to add a new column called category and to plug in each unique different value here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the code. Oh, look, I already have a syntax error here. There's 3 different kinds of errors. They're fundamentally different kinds of errors, and how we go about solving them is it's all different. So the first one, and kind of the simplest one to track down, is a syntax error. With a syntax error, what you've done is what you've written is just unintelligible. The interpreter, the software built into Excel that looks at what you wrote and actually does, makes the computer do things, translates the VBA into machine language so it can be executed. The interpreter can't figure out what you're talking about. Now, some syntax errors, it's nice, they show in red, and you get that annoying dialog box that pops up. Do you have that dialog box? If you'd like to turn that dialog box off, let me show you how to turn that dialog box off. If you choose Tools, Options, there's Auto Syntax Check. If you uncheck that box, if you have a syntax error on a line, it will still show in red, but you won't get the dialog box. Hey, you have an error. Thank you. All right. What's the problem with this line? Yeah, until it's just spelled wrong. So, a human could look at that and might not even notice that it was spelled wrong and think, I totally understand that, do until product, whatever. But the interpreter is pretty picky about when it comes to spelling. And so it's got to be spelled exactly right. And so we correct that, and the red line goes away, and syntax error, solved. So what are we doing here? Oh, we're just printing off. That should run. I think that just prints off all of the products that we have in the database. There's 800 and some odd. Okay, so now we've got a little loop here that just scrolls through the data. That's excellent. Let's look at another kind of syntax error that doesn't show up in red. I'm going to delete the word loop. Do I have a syntax error here? What line is it on? What line is the error on? Yeah, the error is not on any line. The problem is we're missing a line. And so there's nothing here. Could the not the interpreter, but the editor, what makes that line go red is the editor. So the editor knows something about the syntax that you're working with here. The editor looks at that and goes, yeah, there's just something wrong here, and it can highlight that red. I don't understand it. Now this one, there's just nothing for it to highlight red. And so it's possible to have syntax error that doesn't actually show up as a problem, because this is like, as soon as I say do, I have to have a loop somewhere. Where I put it is up to me, but it's still a syntax error, even though there's really no line where the error is. Okay, syntax errors, you simply have to get rid of. You can't even run the code until you get rid of them. Now, as it turns out, in a lot of other programming languages are languages that we call compiled languages. When you say, I want to run this program, step one, it has to go through and translate the whole program that you wrote into machine code, like a separate executable program that it can then run. VBA is not like that. VBA is an interpreted language, which means when you say to run it, it says, well, what do you want to run? I want to run this sub-procedure right here. It says, great. I will just translate this one sub-procedure. And you could have dozens of sub-procedures, and they could all have errors in them. As long as the one that you run doesn't have an error, it'll compile and run, even though you've got all kinds of problems, elsewhere in your code. And so if we have a sub-procedure here and we run it, if it calls another sub-procedure, it doesn't compile that other sub-procedure until it actually calls it. So once we get to the statement that calls it, then it'll say, oh, another sub-procedure, go compile it, and then run it. So you don't have to get rid of all of your errors. You can have errors in your code that won't really matter as long as they're not what you're currently working on. Okay, syntax errors, you got rid of them. Second kind of error, let's talk about it as a logic error. So what's a logic error? Remember if our book talks about them in these three categories. It probably does. Anybody read the book lately? So syntax error and then a logic error. So a logic error, as far as the computer is concerned, no problem. It runs just fine. But you're telling the computer to do something different than you thought you were telling it to do. So the logic error is where you haven't written the code that you think you've written. And by the way, one of the hardest logic errors to track down is a misspelled variable name. Now, if I do not have option explicit right here, and I come here and say row equals row, and these are pretty short variable names. Do I have a syntax error? Is there a syntax error here? Without option explicit, I don't have to declare my variable names. And it just says, oh, well, there's ROW or RWO. That's some new variable. Great. You need a variable. I'll allocate memory for you for it. By the way, what have I just done to this loop? Yeah, this is now an endless loop. There's no way out of this loop. Fortunately, I have do events in there, so we could stop it. Because row is going to be 2. Now I'm going to say row equals RWO plus 1. What's RWO? Well, yeah, the interpreter is going to go, oh, this is a variable. You haven't allocated it. That's OK. I'll allocate some memory for you. And it makes it into a variant variable. What's the default type for a variant variable? The default type, you just say print it, is a 0-length string. But when you treat a variant variable like an integer, it goes, oh, yeah, I guess I could behave like a 0 if I'm just starting out. And so you just said row equals 0 plus 1. So row is 2 the first time through. The next time through, it's going to be 1. The next time through after that, it's going to be 1. And the next time after, it'll be 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And so especially as you get longer, more descriptive variable names, which is a good thing to have, if you're not using option explicit, it just becomes a really difficult one to find. So in fact, let me do this. By putting option explicit at the top, it converts misspelled variable names from being logic errors to being syntax errors. So now if I try to run this, can't compile. Because it says, you got to declare, you told me, make sure I explicitly declare all variables, and now you can't do it. So that is, I really encourage you to put option explicit at the top. By the way, how can you make VBA or the editor put option explicit in for you? Tools, options, and the second checkbox, require variable declaration. It doesn't really require variable declaration. What that means is when I make a new module, put option explicit at the top. If it's an existing module, it's not going to require variable declaration. It's just going to put option explicit at the top on any new module. Okay, so because logic errors are difficult to track down is the reason that we have debugging tools, which we'll take a look at here in a second. But now, let's talk about the runtime error. So runtime errors they're an interesting breed. So runtime error says syntactically, the interpreter knows exactly what you told it to do. It understands what you told it to do. It can totally convert everything you wrote into machine language. But when it tries to execute what you told it to do, it's not possible. So let's do this. Let's say, all right, what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to, we're going through all these rows, and what I would like to do is I would like to make a sub-procedure called add to list. So let's make a sub-procedure here called add to list. And we're going to give it a list name as a string and a data value as a string. I'm just going to put these with underscores. I think it makes it a little bit more readable. LIST. A little less typable. All right. So we're not doing much with this subprocedure now, but we're gonna go ahead and debug print this out, and I'm gonna call this, and then we'll do some work down here. So I'm gonna call this add to list, and let's see. I want to pass it. I want to build my category list. So my category name is going to be, wait, what do I call it? My list name is going to be category, and then my values are going to come out of column B. So I'm just going to take whatever is in column, let's see, we're going down here. It's so funny, my phone just said to check out these pictures, and I know I silenced it. So I wonder what pictures are so interesting. It wants me to see. Okay, so I think I'm going to just make a little change up here. Let me dim a variable called call as an integer, row equals 2, and let's read column off the active cell. COL equals the active cell, dot column. So now I don't really know which column I'm trying to add. My code doesn't know which column I'm trying to add. So to be able to know what the list name is, product cell, row number 1, column number, column. So I'll be passing, let's say that my active cell is in column 2. So call will be 2. So I'll be passing whatever value is in row 1, column 2. That's the heading. That's what I'm trying to pass that here to my list name. And then my list value will be the same thing, except it will be whatever is on row R, or row. And no parentheses. Okay, so what I'd like to do here is I would like to say, I want to bind a variable onto my list sheet. I got a worksheet named list, or lists. I'd like to bind a variable to it. So dim s as a worksheet, set s equal to worksheets, and I'm looking for the one called lists. Now I'm not doing anything with the list name and the data value at this point, but I'm just going to go ahead and run my process products, and then we should see an issue. All right, so I have an error here. Is it a syntax error? It's not a syntax error. Syntactically, everything's exactly right. I declared a variable as a worksheet variable. That looks great. I said I'm going to bind that variable onto some worksheet. Syntactically, this looks great. The syntax requires, oh, yeah, this is a collection. It knows this collection. It's a worksheets collection. And it says there's 2 ways to identify the worksheets. One by supplying a number, the other by supplying a string. I'm supplying a string. The syntax is perfect. So why is it an error? Yeah, the sheet doesn't exist. The computer, the interpreter knows, yeah, I'm trying to bind a variable onto this sheet, but when it goes and tries to do it, the sheet doesn't exist. Now, would it be possible for my editor to look at this right now and say, hey, there's a problem with this line, and alert me there's a problem with this line? No, not really, because it doesn't know the order the code's going to be written in. There could be some other code somewhere else that's actually adding that sheet, and that's going to happen before this one, and then this one's going to run. That'll be just fine. So with runtime errors, we either want to get rid of them, or we want to trap them. So there's a couple ways. So how could we know if that sheet exists? before we try to bind onto it. Could we ask it, does that sheet exist? Is there a way to ask it? Does that sheet exist? How would you ask it? What's that? Oh, yeah. Like just maybe sheet exists and then put here lists. Yeah, there's no sheet exists function. There's no built-in way to ask the question, does this sheet exist? Now, you could write a function called sheet exists pretty easily, right? And you just make a loop that goes across all the sheets and checks to see if the name matches the one that you passed in. You pass it the sheet name, check all the sheets, see if it's there. So that would be one way. And the truth is that's probably the preferred way to solve this problem. But I'm trying to show you how to trap for an error because it's possible. Here's the problem. When you set your interpreter to go run some code, I mean, I think I told you this, right? The VBA interpreter is like the Maytag repairman of interpreters, right? The vast majority of installations of Excel, no one ever uses the VBA interpreter. Can you imagine every time Excel opens up, that VBA interpreter goes, oh boy, maybe today's the day. Someone's going to use me. And then by the end of the day, no, not today. Wasn't today. Maybe tomorrow. It just sit around. It's bored all the time. And so you give it something to do and it's just so excited to be able to do something. But you tell it to do something that it can't do and it just gets flustered. It's like, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to stop. So what you have to do is say, listen, interpreter, if for some reason I told you to do something that you couldn't do, I'm going to tell you something else to do in that case. Oh, great. If I bump into a line that I can't do, I got something else to do. And it moves on to it. So that's what, when we trap a runtime error, that's what we're doing. We're saying, listen, if we come to a line that you can't execute for some reason, don't get upset about it. I'll give you something else to do. And the interpreter doesn't care what it's doing as long as it can do it. It's glad, oh, go somewhere else and do it. Great. I'd love to do it. But you tell it something it can't do, and it sulks, it kind of pouts, it stops. I can do anything then. But here's the first thing that we can do. Let me just kind of show you the first very dangerous thing. On error. Now here, when we say on error, we're giving it an instruction. We're saying, okay, interpreter, if you run into a line that you can't execute, I'll tell you what to do. And there's several things we can tell it what to do. Here's one of the things we can do. Resume next. R-E-S-U-M-E. That's a syntax error. There we go. Resume next. It's kind of a strange statement, and you don't ever want to use it all by itself, although it's valid. What this does, it says, listen, if there's an interpreter, it says interpreter, if there's an error, just forget about it and move on. Whatever that line was that caused the error, it must not have been that important. Just keep on going. So this line by itself, if you use this by itself, you convert runtime errors into logic errors. You will not get a runtime error now. It just won't. Even if every single line is wrong, it'll just try, nope, 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 keep on moving. So here's proof. I'll run that, and now I don't think it'll have an error. It just runs right through. It never ever binds this worksheet just because it fails each time, but I told it no problem, just move next. Okay, we're going to come back to this one. Here's another thing that we can do. On error, go to, and then we tell it where to go. E-R-R-H-A-N-D-L-E-R. Now this is something we haven't seen yet. It's possible to branch to a different part of the code, like an arbitrary other place in this sub-procedure, by giving it this label. Now, I told it to go somewhere. I haven't created that location, but I can create that location just by coming anywhere in my code, putting that label and putting a colon after it. That makes this a label. It says, listen, remember the whole purpose for on error says, listen, if you bump into a line of code you can't execute, then I'll give you something to do. And in this case, what we saw before was just keep on moving. This one says, you run into a line you can't execute, go somewhere else. Here's some code you can execute. And here's the code we could then execute. Message box. There was an error. Okay, so now what would normally be a runtime error, what kind of error is it now? No error at all. I've now trapped that error. So the error, I've caught the fact that we had an error here and we went somewhere else, didn't just continue running. So this will actually be pretty bad if I run this whole thing. So I'm just gonna make a little sub runner for this one for us to play with. Sub a runner. And it's going to call add to list and just pass two data values. Add to list category. And what's our duck acrylic? Okay. But the problem was this is going to put up a message box, and I've got 800 lines of code. It would put up 800 message boxes. I'd have to clear each one individually. Now we'll run it. We should get the same error. There's an error, but it's not going to, it'll only ask it once because I only told it to run this other procedure once. There's a question over here.
Maybe we're just working through steps, but didn't we just take it from having it stop and box to having it stop again?
Yeah, good point. So the question was, hey, before you did anything, when you ran into that error, it stopped the code and it put up a box. And now it stops the code and puts up a box. The difference is now this box that we're putting up, the user can deal with. At this point, the user can deal with it because it comes with this little dialog box. The user hits OK and it moves on. Now you're right. We need to add some more logic for this to be meaningful. But when it, without this error handler, it still stops the code and puts up a box. But this is not something the user can deal with, right? The user is going to go, do I want to end or debug? See, the other one, it just said, OK, the user can deal with that choice. But here, debug, and then it will bring them here. They've never seen this before. And they'll go, oh, what do I do now? Yeah, you don't want that. So yeah, in one sense, it was the same, but it doesn't invoke the VBA environment. Okay. So you can tell it to go to a particular place. And then, you know, interesting thing here, I haven't shown you how to do this yet, but you can have VBA send you an email or send you a text message. So if you've got, you know, something that, wow, we just experienced something we didn't expect to experience, send me an email so I can go help Edna in accounting who's using the worksheet that I wrote, find out what's wrong with what she's doing and get it corrected. So that's, you know, one of the reasons why this might be helpful here is that you can, you know, there's other things that you can do here. Okay, let's go back to, instead of on error, go to a location. Oh, by the way, if I do put like an error handler here in my sub procedure, I definitely want to come here and say exit sub just before the error handler. Why? Well, if there's no error, then I'll hit this anyway. I'll come down here and actually run into this code. This is not like some other structure. It's just, this is just a marker for a place in the code. And so if we don't end up having an error, we'll hit this error handler anyway. So we'll want to set up an exit sub here that says, all right, anything after this is just me trying to deal with it's an error that might happen. So we're really done with the work of the sub procedure here. I'm going to go ahead and just comment this part out. And we'll go back to a different approach that I think is probably the right level for us as we're starting off. So let's look at this other error handler. On error, resume next. Now, we talked about that and said it's probably not such a good idea. It's not a good idea to use it by itself. But we have a line of code here that we think, you know what, this one could cause a problem. I'm assuming that there's a worksheet here. If it's not there, it's gonna cause an error. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna say, all right, I'm gonna try the line that's suspect, and then I'm gonna check to see if there was an error. Here's how you check to see if there's an error. In fact, let me just put a stop here, and I'll run this code again. Okay, so we've got to do something a little bit more sophisticated here, but now we've run all the way to this point. We tried to execute this line, and if this line, you know, without the resume next, this would have caused an error. But we can ask if it did try to cause an error. Here, there's an object called ERR, and I can ask for the ERR.number. It's error number 9. By the way, before there's an error, let me put a stop right here. And I'll run this. Before the error happens, what's error number? It's error number 0. Error number 0 is There was no error. There has not been an error. So if we run past this, now we've got error number 9, but we can also ask for the error's description. ERR dot, and tells me subscript out of range. Whew. Subscript out of range. Seems like we've talked about this error before. If I was referring to a worksheet by its number, like I want worksheet number 1, that 1 is called a subscript. The string in quotes isn't really called a subscript, but it's the same basic problem, right? You tried to refer to a member of a group that doesn't exist. And so it just gives us, that's error number 9, and it gives us the same description, even though it really isn't a subscript problem. Okay, but now that we have interrupted or we've prevented the error from interrupting our code, but we can still look to see if it failed. So now what am I going to put right here? An if statement. If error dot number equals 0, then what does that mean? There was no error. Else if error dot number equals 9, then this is subscript out of range, or sheet does not exist. Now, if it's not 0 and it's not 9, it could be something else that I haven't anticipated. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave my stop right in there. If the error number was 0, great, I know what's going on. If the error number was 9, also great, I know what's going on. If the error number is something else, I don't know what's going on. And so at least while I'm developing, I'll just put that and say, you know, stop here so I can see. It'll take me to the code and say, here's the problem, and I can kind of snoop around and see what it is. But what do I want to do if it's error number 9? Yeah, just create the sheet. Sheets.add. Oh, in fact, I'll do this. I'm going to set s equal to sheets.add. And then I will use that variable s.name equals lists. So now, if the sheet does exist, this won't fail. I'll get here and we'll say, if error number is 0, yep, that's it. We didn't do anything here, but then we'll drop to the end if and ready to move on. If it doesn't exist, I'll have an error number 9, and I'll know how to solve that problem. Add a sheet, call it lists. And then I've already bound my variable onto it, which is what I was trying to do here. So either way, by the time I reach here in my code, now S is attached to the lists sheet. Question here.
What is the difference between sheets.add and worksheets.add?
Oh, what's the difference between sheets.add and worksheets.add? The collection of sheets is all of your sheets in the workbook. How many different kinds of sheets are there? There are sheets besides worksheets. You got your play sheets, you got your Sunday sheets, and your worksheets. No, you've got worksheets and chart sheets. If you can put a chart on a sheet by itself. So the collection called sheets is the collection of all those sheets, chart sheets or worksheets. If you just add something to the sheets collection without telling it what kind to add, it will add a worksheet. So that code would have worked just fine. But you're right, it's better to spell out worksheets here because I really am talking about a worksheet. Okay, so now, let's see. I do have the stop here, but I'll only hit that stop if I get an error that I'm not anticipating. I'm going to get rid of this stop. And now I'm going to run that, and that should, yeah, no error. That looks great. It should have gave me a sheet. There it is. It made the list sheet. I'll run it again. The sheet now already exists. No problem. Because now it bound onto it here just fine. There was no error, so we didn't hit this one. This would cause a problem. If we added a new sheet and tried to call it list, that would cause a different problem. But because we never hit this code, because we're not operating under error number 9, then we just get to go right past it. Now, so that looks pretty good. You know, give yourself a pat on the back. You've just written an error trap, and you know the basic idea now about how to say, here's a line that could cause a problem. I'm going to try to anticipate that and decide what to do in the case that it does cause a problem. But now, what happens for the rest of my code? Any other runtime error I have is going to get handled the same way. I'm still operating under on error resume next. This says intercept the error. I need a way to come down here and tell it if an error happens now, behave as normal, which is what? Yeah, stop my code, put up the dialog box. There's a problem I wasn't expecting. I couldn't do this. And because there's no error trap built around it, you weren't expecting it either. So you'd like to see the error come up. By the way, of the three kinds of errors to track down, what's the easiest one to find? What's the hardest one to find? Logic errors. Yes, this middle one, runtime errors, are not so tough to track down either, but you have to run the code to actually get to it. If you don't turn off that on error resume next, you've just converted runtime errors, pretty easy to track down, to logic errors, pretty difficult to track down. So you really want to shut that off. And unfortunately, the way you shut that off is really weird. So here it is. On error, go to 0. Back in the really early days of BASIC, you had to number each line, right? You're writing a program, you start off, this is line number 1, and then you write the line. I'm now making line number 2, you write the line. I'm now making line number 3, you write the line. And we used to use those numbers to branch to different parts of the code. We would say, oh, if this is true, then go to 27, jump down to line 27 and do something there. And the line numbers were really integral to how you wrote the program. Well, what's the first legal line number? It's line number 1. There is no line number 0. And so when you tell the debugger on error go to 0, you are telling it to do something impossible. There can be no line number 0. You've given it an impossible task. Now remember, what's the interpreter? How does the interpreter feel? As long as you give me something to do, I'm happy. Well, now we've given it an impossible task. And what does it do when it gets an impossible task? It stops. Yeah. And so on error go to 0 itself it doesn't trigger it, because it's not until it reaches an error that it gets to this part that says go to 0 and it goes, I can't do that. It's just not possible. And so that kind of invokes the old normal behavior for having a runtime error. Okay, and so that now is like a complete error trap. And this is just something that you memorize. How do I turn off error handling, put it back to default on error go to 0? There's if there's something to apologize about VBA, this is one of those things I would like to apologize about. That's a really weird way to say it, but that's what it means. It's what it does. Questions? Let's go ahead and kind of build out this example. So what's our first thing? If I'm going to try to add category, I'm going to try to add duck acrylic to a category on my list sheet, what's the first thing I have to do? I need to find, the whole idea is I'm going to have a column with, say, category and all the unique values in category. I'll have one for department and all the unique values in department. So what's step 1? I've got to place duck acrylic onto this sheet for sure. Well, if it doesn't exist already. But I gotta first figure out which column to put it into. So to do that, so that's going to be the next thing that we do here. Now S is attached to the list sheet. That's great. Find the column. Find the column. Okay, so here's the idea. We're going to put the column name right here in row number 1. So we're going to put like category here and so forth. So first we're going to check to see, does it find it? And if so, we want to know what the column number is. We just want to record that column number. So let me go ahead and come up here and declare a variable, dim call as an integer. This will be the column number that we're going to write the data to. And then here's what I'm going to say. Call equals, now I'm looking at this sheet, s dot rows, row number 1, I'm looking at that first row, and I want to find something. Dot find. Now, what am I looking for? I'm looking for whatever the user passed in. It's called list name. Find the list name and look for the whole thing. XLWHOLE. I'm not looking for a partial match. It's got to be a complete match. XL. So the other arguments that I'm skipping in here, this one is like look after a particular cell. This one is something else. If you record yourself doing a find, like Control F, you'll see all the code that it generates for this. So this is going to refer to the cell that it found up to here. I don't want the cell, I want the column that it found. And let me put a stop right here. Let me start off by putting category here, then we'll deal with the problem when it doesn't exist. So now when I run this code, it should have found category in column number 2, so it should have bound call onto 2. So let's just take a look. Call is in fact 2. But what would happen if it wasn't there already? Yeah, then the question is, what does this evaluate? What does this part evaluate to if it doesn't find it? And the answer is nothing. Nothing? Yeah, nothing. What's nothing? It turns out in VBA, nothing is something. There's an object called nothing. It is the only object that has neither properties nor methods. It's just an object. And when you have an object, when you have a reference to an object that's not pointing to an object, VBA points it at nothing. So you can check to see if it's pointing at nothing. But it turns out nothing does not have a column property. And so it's going to be like, there's no property. This object does not have that property. So this will be bound onto an object. What kind of object? The nothing object. No, and there's no property called column. So this will be an error. Let's go ahead and take the data off and we'll take a look. Object variable or with block variable not set. So this is not pointing at a relevant object. Do you want to trap for it or do you want to see around it? Let's go ahead and take 5 minutes, and I would like you just to go ahead and build a trap around this error. And we're going to have 2 situations down here that you're going to run. One of them is going to be found the column, nothing else needed. The other option is didn't find the column, need to add the header at the end of the data in row 1. Whew, what a great comment. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Let's take 5 minutes and let's see if you can do it. 5. Here we go. Okay, so if I'm going to see how I can stop my code, we've seen how to stop with the word stop, but I can also stop with by putting a breakpoint right here. You may have accidentally clicked there sometime and you thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? My line turned red. You clicked on it again and you went, whew, ah. I hope that doesn't ever happen again. But that's just the same thing as stop, but it's on a particular line of code. So now, and the nice thing about that is that you don't accidentally leave stop in your code, right? Because as soon as I close this workbook and open it again, then the breakpoints are gone. So now, when I run this, I get the error, object variable or block with block not set. I'll say debug. This is the line that it was trying to accomplish when it had that problem. But now that I'm in break mode, I have this yellow line going across here. This is like not quite designing and not quite running. I ran up to this point, but everything that I had to put in memory to compile is still in memory. All of my variables are still there. So I can look around at them. I can ask, what's s.name? I can execute that because s is currently bound on to that worksheet because I stopped my code midway. If I let this run the rest of the way out, need something to move that line to that I can run from. And I ask what s.name is, we don't know what you're talking about. Because right now, s isn't bound into memory. When does s get put into memory? When this procedure runs, the interpreter says, oh, let's go allocate some memory for this variable s. And when does it get released? As soon as we hit this end sub, it goes, oh, we're done with all that memory. Give it back to the operating system. So I have to be stopped halfway through to be able to see it and to see what's going on. And so that's what we needed to do. We needed to run this, hit debug, and so now we've got that error. So that's one of the things that it takes, usually when we're just beginning, it takes a while to catch on to, is that there's really 3 different states my program can be in. Design mode, where I'm just writing it. Run mode, where it's all compiled up there in memory and it's running. And then break mode, where it's like halfway in between. And break mode is where we do most of our debugging. This is where we can say, we can kind of poke around and see what's going on here. All right, so let's just go ahead and put an error trap on this. So I've just said on error go to 0. So I'm going to need to on error resume next again. If error.number is equal to 0, then we found the column, nothing to do. Else if error.number equals 91, then we got to do something different. Else, if it's some other problem, we didn't anticipate it, and if. So what do we do if it's error number 91? Well, what this means is there is no column that way. So let's say that call equals, and the same thing, s.rows, so my worksheet, row number 1, or I want to do this, s.cells, row number 1, column number, however many columns there are, so that will be row number 1, the very last column. And from there, I want to come back until I bounce into some text. And so I'll say .end xl2 left. And that's going to come right up to the one that actually has the data in it. And so I want to know the column of that. But then I want one more than that column. Whew. So that will now set the column to a column that doesn't have the heading in it, but now I know where to put the heading. s.cells, row number 1, column number call, dot value equals my list name. And so then I'm done with my error trap on error, go to 0. But now at this point, call has been assigned. So now I've got my column and just ready to put my data in there. So I'll just use that to write the data in. So s dot cells, row number, the very last row, rows dot count, column number call. From there, I want to do an end XL up. End XL up. Dot, now that's going to actually be on the cell that has the data. I don't want that one, I want the next one down. And I could just like ask for the row here and then use that to use a row and a column to plug it, but that's the cell I'm after, so I'll just offset one from it. I'll offset down by one row and I'll set the value of that equal to, what did I call it, data value? And that should then actually put that value in place. So I'll stop this, get rid of my breakpoint down here, and I'll run that code. And it looks like it found it, although I don't quite like that column. That column should have been one more to the right, I thought. So because that didn't behave the way that I wanted it to, let's go ahead and take a different approach. Now, I think some of you have kind of stumbled upon what F8 will do. F8 just says, don't run the whole thing, but just kind of let me come one step at a time. So here, if I press F8 here, I'm here running a runner. And if I press F8 here, it's going to step into, F8 is step into. And here's what it means. Step into this sub-procedure. It's going to actually come in here and go through this sub-procedure line by line. So I can come in here and just kind of come along and we'll be able to follow it and see where it goes. Okay, so at this point, I should be able to ask what my column is. My column is 1, so it found it at 1. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. Let me try that again, but I'm going to give it a different heading that doesn't yet exist. Category X. I'll step through this. Now this one should take me through the second part of the code, finding the column. Yeah, so now it found it on error number 91. So column should be 2 here, but I really expect it to be 2 in the first place. Column is 0. Ah, that's exactly right. It's the set of columns that's on that cell. I want just the column. Very good. All right, let me go ahead and just run this and see if it puts it onto another column. So now it made category X and that put that here. Run it one more time. Yeah, so the first time it came out here, it bounced all the way back, came to here. I told it to come one more over. So it's going to give me leave a blank column over here. I think I'm probably okay with that. Okay. Whew. So the next thing we have to do is we have to look to see if, before we just plop this value in here, we have to check to see if we can find that value in the column. So before we just write it, so this time, instead of having the same error we had here with the find, let's look at how we might actually just get rid of that potential error. And finding cells is something that's quite powerful in Excel. Let me just declare a variable here. I'm going to call it found cell. As a range. Now I'm going to set found cell equal to, I'm looking at that column, s.columns, column number call, dot find the value I'm looking for. I'm trying to find if the data value is in that column. And I'm looking for a complete match, so XL whole here. Now, so I'm not trying to ask what row it's on, what column it's on. I'm just trying to bind this object variable onto whatever object this expression points to. Now, if the find successfully finds it, this will evaluate to a particular cell. If it doesn't find it, what would it evaluate to? Nothing, this mystical object. So now I can say if found cell, let's do it this way. If the type of found cell, so I can ask for the type of a variable, if that is a range, then it found it. If type of found cell equals range. I don't see what the error is. Someone see the error there? Oh, sorry, wrong language. That's JavaScript, type name. There we go. So if the type name of that variable is a range, then it means we found it. Oh, so if the type name is nothing, then that means we didn't find it and we need to put the data in there. Otherwise, it's already there, nothing else to do. So now, category X duck acrylic, if I run this, it should run without error, but not put another value on there. Now, that's tough because how do I know that it actually worked? I could step through it. And so I could either start way up here and I'll start it here. I hit F8, and if I hit F8 again, I'll come through it. So I want to find out found cell equals nothing. So it must have equaled nothing. That looks pretty good. I actually got to this point and checked it. Yeah, it's a range. It's not nothing, it's a range. So that looks pretty good. By the way, if I come through here and I start stepping, let's say this sub-procedure, the problem I'm looking for is not in the sub-procedure. I want to execute it, but I don't want to step through it. That's what step over is. So debug step over or shift F8, that doesn't, you might think that step over means like don't do it, like skip it. Like, I mean, if you stepped over something, you wouldn't step in it. But in this case, step over says go run that whole thing and then come back. Just don't step. Do it, but don't step through it. So step over actually runs the line that you're on. Or let's say we were there. And by the way, you can drag your point back up here. Let's say you stepped into it and you went, oh man, I didn't want to step into it. I want to step out of this. Well, that's the other choice that we have here. So it's debug step out, Control Shift F8. Control Shift F8. And what that will do is finish running all that code, take you back to the last call you came from, and then take you to the next step there. Question?
When it highlights that line, does it execute that line or is it stopped right before?
So the question is, when the line is yellow here, what does that mean? We just executed this line or we're just about to execute this line? And the answer is we're just about to execute this line. This is the line that it's getting ready to do. If you say step or if you say play, just start running again. It'll pick up from there and go. So by the way, we should now be able to call add to list products. Oh yeah, we already have the call built in here. This should add to the list of whatever our active cell is. Let me come over here to products. I'll click on category and I'll run the process products. And that should build that unique set of category. So we had this one here already, category X. We didn't go on top of that one because it's a different category name. And now it looks like we've got just unique values here. So we've kind of successfully written that. Okay, a couple of debugging tools that I want to show you. So all the debugging, kind of the snooping around I've done in the variables so far. I've just come to the immediate window and like, kind of print something off. Well, here's a couple things we can do. One is called the locals window. The locals window just shows you what all the values of your variables are. I am turning you all the way off. But you don't see anything unless you're in break mode. So let me go ahead and run this again. In fact, I'll run this one in break mode. The question is, how to pull up the locals window? Just view locals window. There's no hotkey for it, apparently. And now it's next to impossible to see. But this tells me right now, row and column in this module are both 0. Well, I just barely started, so let me come in F8 and step through here, and we should see F8. Now, have I executed this line yet? Not yet, but as soon as I hit F8 again, it will, and we should see that value change immediately there. And then it'll figure out what column is, and I can see it go. So now we've jumped down here, so we've got a different set of variables that we're looking at here. List name, data value, those got passed in here. Column is 0. Eventually, we're going to get to the column here. And we set the column, so column is now, oh, why is column 0? It was because I didn't execute that line. This had an error, but it just kept moving. So now we've bound column onto that, and column has a value. So you can see all the local variables in whatever procedure that you're running. That's nice. There's a couple other things that I want to show you, though, about this. So I'm going to close the locals window. The other thing I can do is I can set a watch expression. I don't want to see them all. I just want to know what the list name is. I can right-click that and say Add Watch. A watch expression just says, it's like the locals window, but you could have hundreds of variables declared. You don't want to see them all. I just want to see a few. And that's what the watch expression does. So now, same thing like the locals window, but it's the watches window. And now it's only showing the ones that I put in here. So, and those will behave the same way. But what's more powerful about a watch expression is that, let's see, let me come to just call. I'm going to right-click that and say Add Watch. But now I'm going to make what's called a conditional breakpoint. I'm going to say break whenever this value changes. So anytime the value call changes, and by the way, I'm actually in a particular procedure. So this is the add to list procedure. Anytime the column changes values, I'm going to go into break mode. It's not just going to show me in the watch window, it's actually going to stop my code and say the value just changed. That is a huge opportunity when you're debugging to be able to say, this variable is going somewhere that it doesn't belong to go. It shouldn't be going there. I'm not sure what's causing it. So you can say, hey, every time this variable changes, stop so I can see what's going on. So now if I run, call just executed, this line executed, and that changed the variable. And so it dropped me out of run mode and took me into break mode right there. So I can break whenever the condition changes, or I can put in more complex values. Let's see, do we have row here? Oh, we're not actually setting row here. Let's do this. Let's come to this one. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to add a watch on row. And instead of just leaving it row, I'm going to say, put an expression in here, row equals 10. And now I'm going to change, by the way, that expression now is either true or false, depending on what row is. It'll either be true or false. But now that I've got it as a logical expression, I can say, you know what, break when this is true. So as soon as this whole expression becomes true, that's when I want to go into break mode. So I'll run process products, and it should run just fine until, oh, call has changed. Did I run the wrong one? I don't think I did. I think I've got my other breakpoint. I got to get rid of this other breakpoint here. We delete that one. Oops. Delete watch. There we go. And I'm going to run this one. And it should run fine until this breakpoint. And it tells me this is the breakpoint it triggered. That's the line that just completed. And so it's sitting on the next line saying, I stopped because that condition became true. Okay, those are the main debugging tools, debugging and error handling. Have a good time on the exam. I will hold a review session this Thursday, even though the exam is already going. So far, I think I've had one student come to my review sessions. Glad I wasn't alone. The review session's every Thursday at 11 in room 210. And that's an announcement I put on Learning Suite, and so it's 6. You go to Learning Suite, it should show you that. All right, thanks for coming. Class dismissed.